These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon, War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon. But why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, Cinco de Mayo is tomorrow, but may the 4th be with you today. Happy May 4th. It's a beautiful Tuesday here in Portland. I hope life is well with you. I want to get into, throughout the program today, we have 3 hours to talk. In the third hour, Lori Wallach is going to drop by, with Global Trade Watch, the part of Public Citizen that Ralph Nader started years and years ago. And she is such an expert on international trade. And the question is, how do we vaccinate the world? There's actually, on the front page of the Financial Times today, a huge debate about this. Basically, there's one story about how Pfizer is showing billions in profits from this new vaccine. And then another story about Anthony Fauci saying, well, maybe you shouldn't let other companies license or even give away the vaccine because, I might make a... Anyhow, we're going to get into that in the third hour. And we've got a crazy alert. Let me scroll down and see which hour that's going in. That's going in hours 2. That's... You're gonna... Yeah, well, maybe Melinda Gates actually does have a romance going with Dr. Fauci. We'll figure this out. But QAnon thinks they've got it figured out. We'll get to that in the second hour. Also in our second hour, Dan Mitchell, Dr. Dan Mitchell, is going to drop by. I believe his PhD is in economics. And he's going to be explaining to me why the Biden tax cuts on people making under $75,000 a year, for the first time in forever, people making under the tax cuts that Joe Biden has gotten into the legislation that he's already gotten passed so far, the American Recovery Act, the Jobs Act, the American Recovery Act. There are more tax cuts for people making under $75,000 a year in that bill than ever before. And the majority of people making under $75,000 a year this year won't pay any federal income taxes at all. Whereas people making over $400,000 a year, Biden's fixing to raise their taxes. And so Dan Mitchell is going to tell us why that's a crazy idea. You can't have that. Or maybe not. I don't know. We'll find out when he comes on the program. And also in this hour, after the first break, I want to get in the second block of this first half hour. I want to get into the question of what the GOP will look like in 5 years. And I've got a take on that I think may surprise you. But I wanted to start out with the piece that I published this morning over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled Nomad. I keep putting an N in there, and there shouldn't be. It's Nomadland. Excuse me. No Man Land is, just such a, it's an old word, but Nomadland, a word that was invented for the movie, exposes the middle-class ripoff. Louise and I had been meaning to watch this movie for quite a while. It won all kinds of awards. Chloe Zhao, I believe, is how her name is pronounced. Put the movie together, directed the movie, just brilliant job. Frances McDormand acts in it. It is a drama, but it is a drama as in fiction. But most of the actors in the movie are actually these people who are living in these RVs, traveling around the country, working at Amazon warehouses and cleaning toilets and God only knows what, struggling to survive, basically. And Frances McDormand plays Fern, the lead character. So it's all based on an actual nonfiction book that was published a number of years ago. I'll get to that in just a moment. But it really hit me personally, and I don't know if any of your growing up had to do with this. This was sort of the my parents' generation. My parents came of age in the 1930s and 40s and died in the early 2000s, and they were. I know that there were a lot of people who were doing the same thing that they were doing because I met them every weekend. When I was a little kid, when I was 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, every weekend, or nearly every weekend, we'd hop in the back of the station wagon, and we lived in Lansing, and we'd drive someplace. 1 week it would be Owasso, another week it would be Flint, another week it would be Kalamazoo, another week, and we would drive to these little towns all over central, southern Michigan, northern Michigan. Sometimes we'd go up to Newego, and we'd from there we'd travel to over to Muskegon or up to Traverse City or whatever it may be. And our goal on these weekend trips was to hit as many secondhand stores Salvation Armies and Goodwills, and some of them just, had local names. As many secondhand stores as possible, because my dad and mom, I mean, yeah, this is where we got some of our clothes and things from. We were not wealthy. But mostly it was because mom and dad were collecting what they called antiques. Mom had this huge button collection. They were looking for small stuff. And the reason they wanted small stuff was because it could fit in an RV. Mom was collecting buttons. Dad was collecting postcards and stamps. They were both collecting small figurines and small pieces of art, things that they thought would appreciate over time, little Hummel figurines. I mean, their house was filled with this stuff. When they died, my brother Stan spent years trying to get rid of this stuff. But their plan for retirement was that, when Dad hit, and I think it was going to be around 62 or something like that, that he had 40 years in with the tool and die shop. He had a good pension that would supplement his Social Security. He had health insurance that would cover him for the rest of his life, although it became basically a Medicare supplement. And he had a pension. Well, I think I just said that. He had a pension that would supplement his Social Security. So they were going to buy an RV and travel all over the country. They'd always wanted, throughout all the years that we were growing up. Occasionally we'd have vacations where we'd go someplace, but usually our vacations were just in Michigan. And they wanted to see the Grand Canyon, and they wanted to see the desert in Arizona, and they just, they wanted to see the country. And their plan for how to pay for it was that all along the way they would stop at antique stores and secondhand stores, and they would be selling this stuff that they'd collected for years because it would have appreciated. Now, Dad died young because he got mesothelioma from, the asbestos industry lying to him. Whole nother story. I've told it before on the air. So they never really got to experience that retirement. But there are a lot of people who are kind of doing that, or who are just living in nice RVs around the country, that whole RV living thing. That's not what this movie is about. That's what people think about. But this movie is about people who are hanging on by their fingernails. In many cases, they are homeless, but they are not houseless. They're living in these RVs. And they're sleeping in Walmart parking lots in their RVs. They migrate south and west during the winter, back north and east during the summer. And what we're seeing is that this is like the 2021 version of homelessness. I write in my piece over at HartmannReport.com today about how, Louise and I used to live here in Portland on a house that was on a main street. And, virtually every week we'd wake up one morning and there'd be a new RV parked out in front of the house. Old, beat up, kind of fallen apart RVs, and sometimes we had to clean up their trash from the front yard or hose down their sewage from the street. This is like the grapes of wrath. This is, and it raises some really interesting questions. Why is it that in the richest country in the world we can't provide for people when capitalism fails them? In the movie, the movie starts out with Fern losing her husband and then her job, and then the whole town basically goes broke. Well, why didn't we take care of those folks? They do in Europe. Why have we let our Social Security benefits get so badly eaten up by inflation, and Reagan raising the retirement age and taxing Social Security benefits, that people can't live on it anymore? Why is it that in America, when people lose their jobs, like we saw in this movie, Nomadland — have you seen the movie, by the way? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Why is it that when people lose their jobs here, they also lose their health care? And they also get kicked out of college if they can't afford to pay tuition.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, this does not happen in most other advanced countries. It just doesn't. And welcome back. Apologies, I got up here a little late, and I have to log into my call screen, and that was not it. It's hard to type when you only have one hand. There we go. All righty. So hopefully we can connect now to our call screen software. But this movie was just the movie just starts out with Fern losing basically losing everything, and I turned to Louise about 10 minutes into the movie, and I said, the key to this movie is that Fern and all these people around her have basically lost everything because of 40 years of Reaganomics. I mean, 40 years ago, you could actually retire on Social Security. 40 years ago, there was a fairly robust social safety net. This was the Great Society that Lyndon Johnson had put into place, those all way too generous welfare programs that the Republicans were always squealing about. And now, what do we have? Nothing. Well, very little. And especially if you don't have a permanent address. And so this movie, Nomadland, which is based on this incredible nonfiction book, throughout the movie, person after person, story after story, you're getting these stories of people who are just hanging on by their fingernails. And Amazon figured out a way, and I'm not sure if this is, to their benefit or not, to provide employment to these people, but it's really tough employment. Wayne in Seattle. Wayne, you live in a van?
Yeah, Tom. I've been listening to you ever since I was a little kid. Anyways,
cool.
I love you. You're a start.
Tell me about living in a van, Wayne. We have about a minute.
Okay. Well, you're my champion for reasonable, smart talk. Anyways, but yeah, no, I live in my van because it's so expensive. I can't afford the rent in Seattle. Mm-hmm. I live in Seattle. And so,
yeah.
I have, I don't really mind living in my van. I've been doing it for a long time, but it's, the prices are just outrageous. When you add in the rent, the water, the sewer, the garbage, the electricity, I mean, you got to have.
So what happens when your van breaks down?
Well, fortunately for me, I've been saving money, so I have like $3 or $4 grand. I don't even know, but I can, hope buy another one. But hey, this is one thing I want to say to you now, because I've been itching to say this to you. In Seattle's a really liberal place, right? But the radio stations, even the ones you think were cool, and the TV stations, they're all just beating the hell out of Biden. I think Biden's a great president. And radio has been completely taken over by right wingers. It's in America, and now it's Spanish language radio is doing the same thing. Wayne, thank you for the call, and thanks for the heads up from a story from somebody who's actually living in his van. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma. A serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com.
So, number one, number one topic, this whole thing about Nomadland. If you watch the movie, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I just don't see people hitting rock bottom like this in other countries around the world. And I think that, 40 years of Reaganism has just ripped this country apart. And by the way, I mentioned in the article that I write over at HartmannReport.com is that if you're looking for a palate cleanser after you watch Nomadland, watch Michael Moore's Where to Invade Next, which is where he travels around the country, or travels around the world looking at countries who have taken American social ideas and put them into place. Ideas that have been fought by Republicans here in the United States. The second topic that I wanted to bring up in this hour, and then we can discuss this stuff after the break at the bottom of the hour, is the Republican Party. What is going on in the GOP right now? You get Mitt Romney, who was booed at his state convention in Utah over the weekend. You've got Liz Cheney, who came out yesterday, I believe it was, I shared her tweet with you saying that, Trump is actually, and the entire GOP is actually promoting a big lie. Now there's a member of Congress who has come out. He was one of the 11, I believe, in the House of Representatives who voted to impeach Donald Trump. And he has come out and said, yeah, Liz Cheney probably isn't a good fit for leadership in the Republican Party, because in the Republican Party now you've got to believe in the big lie. You've got to go along with Trump's lie or you're out. And Liz Cheney's not going with his lie. She's a truth teller. Well, Liz Cheney's also a right-wing wackadoodle. I mean, she's also someone who is all in favor of promoting things that make global warming worse, and doesn't want unions and wants tax cuts for billionaires and all. I mean, just all the normal right-wing stuff. I remember well, and I remember it because my dad was a Republican political activist, basically. But I remember well the 1960 Republican Convention. Now, I was only 9 years old in 1960. But I remember watching that thing with Dad on television. And Nelson Rockefeller got up. And the former Vice President of the United States, right, and a lifelong Republican, Nelson Rockefeller got up and said, we cannot, I'm doing this, I'm paraphrasing, this is all from memory. I've got the clips over at the studio, and in 2 weeks when we're back in the studio, I'll be able to play these audio clips for you, which I'm really looking forward to. Because I did this rant like 10 years ago when we had a similar debate inside the GOP. Nelson Rockefeller got up in front of the entire Republican Party at this convention in 1960. This was where they nominated Barry Goldwater for president. Nelson Rockefeller got, or maybe, no, it was 64. I'm sorry. This was 1964. This is when Barry Goldwater ran against LBJ. And Nelson Rockefeller got up and said, we have to embrace not just the people in our party who are, freaked out about the communists and the State Department and all that kind of stuff, the hard right, as it were. But we have to embrace the middle, or we're going to lose this country and we're going to lose this party. And he was booed off the stage, or he was booed loudly. I don't know if they drove him off the stage, but he couldn't get through parts of his speech because he was being booed, just like Mitt Romney. And he was followed then by Barry Goldwater, who gave his famous speech where he said, extremism and the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of something that wasn't liberty is no virtue. And he got standing ovation that lasted for minutes. And in 64, it became the party's nominee. And what did that do to the Republican Party? Well, they put up this right-wing crazy, Barry Goldwater, as their presidential nominee in 64, and they got wiped out. I think they won 2 states in that election. LBJ just walked away with it. Now, part of that was, the country was wounded from Jack Kennedy having been killed the year before. But a large part of it, and there was the famous Daisy ad that Goldwater was a right-wing crazy who was going to start a nuclear war. But look at what it did to the Republican Party. Nixon had to basically reinvent the Republican Party for the '68 election as a party of white nationalists. Rather than being afraid of communists, they were afraid of black people. That was his Southern strategy. Bring in the Dixiecrats. So he reinvented the Republican Party as a party of white nationalism and of basically, inward-looking, we don't want to be involved in the world kind of thing. I'm going to end the war in Vietnam, which, of course, he didn't do. He blew up LBJ's efforts to end the war in Vietnam. It was a very dishonest thing. But basically, Nixon put the GOP on the path to Reagan, and then Reagan took us to full, hardcore right-wing authoritarianism. And Trump has just put a cherry on top of that.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So the thing I'm struggling with, and the question I'm asking you, is what's the Republican Party going to look like in a couple of years, particularly after Trump leaves?
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wow. What a day, huh? So much going on. Will in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I saw Nomadland, and I had exactly the same impression as you. Within minutes of the movie, I said to I was talking to my wife too, and I said, "This is an indictment of Reaganomics, exactly what it is." And it's an awesome movie. I urge anybody who hasn't seen it to see it. And in fact, I kind of was talking to my wife about this after the movie, and I was saying to her that, God forbid, if she were to predecease me, I hope I go first, frankly, that I very, very likely would leave our little teeny house to our daughter and buy an old RV and hit the road like Fern does in that movie, because I am so over capitalism. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I despise the system with every fiber of my body, and
Well, that's the subtext of the movie, Will, is and I've seen similar stories in long articles, long thoughtful kind of New Yorker kind of articles, not necessarily in the New Yorker, but where people have gone and lived in homeless tent communities and discovered that in some of these communities, some of them are highly dysfunctional. They're filled with people who are severely mentally ill. Others are like small communities, little survival communities of rational people who are just trying to get by, literally living in tents. And that's the kind of the secondary story of the movie. You know, the tearjerker part of the movie is how these people are looking out for each other, how they're caring for each other, how they've created a culture, a community below the normal economy, except that they still have to work in these Amazon warehouses, which is just backbreaking work for somebody in their 50s or 60s or 70s, and or clean toilets or give blood or sell blood or whatever it may be. But back to you.
Yeah, no, you're right. I understand. That's the very sad part of it, and it is overall a very sad movie. Obviously, and the hopeful part of it is the only hopeful part of it is that it's an escape valve. Not a great one, but it's an escape valve from what Reaganism has brought us, which is a complete poverty and oppression by, frankly, the 1%. And I should theoretically love capitalism. I worked for AT&T, IBM. I worked for Wall Street. I currently work for a giant transnational corporation, and so theoretically I make good money. It's all gone. I have none. I've spent. It's not because of overspending. Every dime I have has gone to student loans, medical debt, and basically my silly little mortgage, and I have nothing left. And it frankly didn't work for me. So I have no choice at this point. You know.
Yeah, this is the American economy, and we should not have to pay for student loans, and we should not have to pay for medical debt, and your mortgage should represent a store of value for you. Will, thank you for the call, and thanks for your thoughts on this. Spot on. Jim in Las Vegas. Hey, Jim, you lived in a van?
Tom, I watched the movie too, and I didn't like it at all. It was very depressing. It was very slow. And after the 2 hours were up, I shook my head and I said, "What a waste of 2 hours." Now,
okay.
I lived in an RV, an old junky RV, for 1 year. I traveled across the country, and I stayed in areas like were depicted in that movie, especially in Arizona and parts of California, and parked. Now, you said in the movie it showed people helping each other, but that's true of any subcategory. The homeless people here in Las Vegas, they help each other.
That was my point.
Pardon me?
That was my point. That, facing adversity, people will form community, and people will form support groups.
Right. Okay. Well, I misunderstood it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I thought the movie was very, very depressing and very, very slow. And while I was watching it, I kept thinking, well, something's gonna happen, and it's gonna get better.
No, this is a slice of life movie, Jim. I mean, there are different genres. There was no great inciting incident and crisis and climax where everybody's trying to climb to the top of the hill, but I get your criticism. I get your critique. And thank you for the call. Lee in Los Angeles. Hey, Lee, your thoughts?
Oh, yes. Hi, good morning. First of all, I'm glad that you actually made that point about Nomadland. I felt a lot of people missed the storytelling, which was blending together of the movie and actually partial documentary, which I thought was interesting, bringing in.
And in fact, if I could add, Lee, forgive the interruption, but while Frances McDermott, I think is her name, was the principal actor in the movie, who is an actor with great credentials and a solid actor. Most of the people who were in the movie were actually people living in their vans. They're not quite homeless. They're the van people, playing themselves, or in some cases playing other characters. And I thought that was kind of cool too. Back to you, Lee.
Yeah. Oh, no, the gentleman that runs I looked him up. I forgot his name. He has a very interesting story, the one that runs the seminars for van living. He's a real person. Also, secondary was, yes, I felt the movie did miss a little bit, though, when it came to, but I guess it was probably more about the older, middle-aged people who we'd assume would be retired. There was a little portion that talked about millennials, but I think one or two of the gentlemen that called earlier did seem to be in the younger category, that it is becoming a choice for millennials to already adapt to van life early on. And it is interesting how even among the young people, they've created their own little communities for college students, I believe. It's not unusual for people to live in their cars in order to cut down on their expenses. So it's almost like it's not even surprising to hear that people do this anymore, because you see it across the board. With the homeless communities, I live in Los Angeles, there's so many, and there's so many different categories of unhoused people. But the one thing I can definitely say is they look out for each other. I have donated, given items, and just I turn around and suddenly it's being shared with random people. So they do look out. But there was another thing side note, if you were aware of it, that there are studies, or perhaps I learned it from you, that say that in times of difficulty, people actually come together. So the larger these communities grow, the more likely they actually are to be protective of one another, not to cause problems within the community. It's complete opposite of what.
Generally speaking, the one thing that disrupts that, and you're right, you're absolutely right, Lee, and there's a lot of sociology on that. Basically, people form tribes, and tribes are protective thing. I mean, this is in our DNA going back to before we were, probably standing upright, and but. The one thing that will blow that up is the Donald Trump in the community, is when there's a psychopath with a powerful personality and a physical presence that is capable of intimidating other people, who takes that over. And I heard a story of a homeless community here in Portland where that happened. I'm guessing that that's not all that uncommon, that from time to time you'll see homeless communities being just totally destroyed by a crazy person, and I don't mean that by a mentally ill person of the category of Donald Trump, by a sociopath, by a person who's charming and charismatic and powerful, and yet absolutely willing to destroy other people in order to get what they want, whether it's sexual favors or whether it's more food or whether it's a better tent or whether it's whatever it may be. Yeah. Lee?
And I would say that was the one thing the movie, sorry, just to sum up, that was the one thing the movie didn't show, which it's fine, was the abuse, we'll say societal abuse, and the way people look at these people when they walk into businesses, when their car is on the side of the road, which is secondary, of course. But yes, there's tremendous amount of social abuse as well.
Yeah, or the crisis that they experience when they get seriously sick. I mean, they didn't go there either, and these people are of the age where people start getting cancer, they start getting, disabled by things like arthritis and stuff like this, and that's all tough stuff too. Lee, I've got to get another call in here before. Okay, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Thank you for your time, Tom. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Dale in Springfield, Missouri. Dale, we have the 1 minute before the break. What's up?
Okay, I'll make it quick, Tom. The Nomadland lifestyle isn't really new, and it's pretty much the story of my life. In the late 50s and 60s, I grew up in an 8 by 30-foot travel trailer towed behind a 3/4-ton flatbed while my dad built the interstates. We traveled from job to job, north in the summer, south in the winter. I went to 23 different schools the first 6 years. I learned how to check myself into school and back out again a couple of months later. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world, but I wouldn't want my kids to go through it either. 40 years later, here I am after my last divorce, and I now live in a 35-foot RV behind a 3/4-ton truck. When I want to move, I move. And I always have a yard outside my door that I don't have to mow.
Well, I guess there's an upside, Dale. I guess there is. It's Dennis Weaver was an old friend of mine. He wrote a book called The Whole Life's a Stage, or The Whole World is a Stage. I wrote the foreword for it. And he tells the story of growing up during the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, and him and his mother and his sister having to flee Oklahoma for Oregon to do strawberry picking. He ultimately ended up in Los Angeles and got a job as an actor. But his book is kind of like your life, or at least the first 5 years of his life, or not the first 5 years, but the early ones of his story. Dale, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I think on the one hand, we risk romanticizing this. On the other hand, we risk, over freaking out about it. But this is real stuff now. And welcome back. Let's let's see here, Gary at Overland Park, Kansas. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, I loved your reference to Nomadland and the Grapes of Wrath, and it reminded me of the 1920s Andrew Mellon, the billionaire Secretary of the Treasury whose policies caused the Great Depression. Over 12 years of Republican presidents from 1920 to 1932, they cut the top income tax rate from 77% to 24% and slashed the federal estate tax, leading to the Grapes of Wrath and the original Nomadland. And then
You're right.
Go ahead.
I said you're right, and we used to call, what we're calling now homeless people, we used to call hobos.
That's correct. That's correct. And there were homeless camps in Washington, D.C. and around the country. If you do a Google search for them, you'll see pictures of them all over the internet. And FDR had to dip out of it, and his Federal Reserve Chairman, Mariner Eccles, described it this way. He said a giant suction pump had by 1929 to 1930 drawn into a few hands an increasing portion of currently produced wealth. The other fellows could only stay in the game by borrowing. When their credit ran out, the game stopped.
Wow, and that was a brilliant description of what was going on, particularly on Wall Street at the time, and that led to to all these. Steinbeck was a great chronicler of that time, but there are others as well, and it led to this whole thing that FDR was able to fix. Hey, thank you very much, Gary, for that. Thanks for the call and thanks for the quote. That was a great one. Mick in Seattle. Hey, Mick, what's up?
Mick, yes, Tom, hi. I'm a person who has chosen to live under their means, and I live in my van since 2006 when I got laid off as a teacher. Also, I was close to retiring. So now, thanks to the last two presidents who have given out free money, I'm using it to start my new mobile soup kitchen called Food Not Bombs Food Kitchen. Soup kitchen.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I'm going to use that money. I'm going to walk my talk. And I've been going up and down the West Coast from San Luis Obispo all the way to Seattle. And right now I'm fixing my car so that I can go back on the road. The deal is, though, that living under your means is a choice. And I think in the land of consumerism, we need to start doing that. We need to start saying to ourselves, what can we really, truly do without? And food isn't one of them. Food is the pathway to peace. And you can tell that when you sit around a dinner table, everybody shuts their mouths and listens more than they talk because they're eating. So I sense that the movie brings out the romanticism, yet it brings out the truth. And I see people who are physically challenged, mentally challenged, and they are beautiful people. People cannot profile them like police do criminals. We need to start treating others as we wish to be treated.
Yeah. Thank you, Mick, and good luck on your soup kitchen. That's great. I'm glad to hear about what you're doing. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left,
by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. You know, just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Richard in Naples, Florida. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. How are you? I just want to let you know that my wife and I, she is from the Bahamas. We were sailing. My plan was to sail around the world. I met her in the Bahamas, and she came back with me. I've owned 30 acres here in Naples, right in the center of the now most populated area of Collier County. We have owned this for 50 years, and I am now looking, she and I are looking to help folks who have the Nomadland situation, because we know what that's like. When you're sailing, you have to do a lot of that as well. You have to look out for each other. We're into a whole new era, I believe, in terms of how human beings have to start to look at nature and how they have to start to look at each other. Either that or we fail completely and we'll lose the human species. I mean, that's the way I'm seeing it.
So you're doing something with your 30 acres here?
Well, trying to. The counties make it very difficult. They're looking to put a 250-foot communication tower right smack dab next to it in violation of variance laws. They don't seem to care about that. We won the case, and the guy ends up at, you know, the hearing.
But how is that going to affect? Are you going to let people come camp on your land? Basically, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're gonna need some infrastructure for that. You're gonna need water. You're gonna need septic. You're gonna need waste. You're working on those things.
We're working on those things. Yes.
That's great. That's great. Well, you know, if you reach the point where you're open for business, give me a shout back. Put up a website, you know, where people can find it, and give me a shout back, and I'd be glad to promote it. Richard, thank you for the call. Good on you. Ken in West Lynn, Oregon. Hey, Ken. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Well, Tom, I have to agree with all your previous callers, but I mean, if you really want to consider conspiracy theories, you really have to look at the ideas of Milton Friedman, Laffer, and all the neoliberalism. They've all
that's where it all started.
Yeah, exactly, and it's just been propagated by a class that wants control and domination, and that's really kind of the long and short of it. And they really don't care about anything other than expanding their own wealth and privilege.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was Friedman's thing, was, you know, greed is good. I mean, you know, the movie with Michael Douglas in it, Wall Street, just kind of epitomized the Milton Friedman worldview that Ronald Reagan adopted and has been the central marching theme of the Republican Party for 40 years now. Wayne in Las Vegas. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to comment on some of the themes of the movie Nomadland. I had to watch it twice because the first time it is uncomfortable, and I think that some people who are used to going to movies, they love the Marvel comics, the action-packed, but I tell my friends it's a wonderful movie, but it's about as exciting as going to the museum to look at the paintings and pictures. It's not exciting.
Yeah, it's a slice-of-life movie.
Boy, is it beautiful. And I think I can know how to tie in the Amazon portion of the film, how I took it as, in the beginning, she loses all these institutions, her family, her city, her job, all these things that people think they can live and they can count on is taken away from them. And then it goes into the generosity is a very strong theme throughout this movie. Even the people who live this life, they're willing to give somebody else anything they have just to help them. And I saw that in being what Amazon was the role of Amazon, in that she gets seasonal work. Here's a little generosity. We'll help you a little bit. you know, if you want to do this backbreaking work, but we're not going to be there for you the whole time. And that's how I saw it.
Right, which raises the question, is this generosity or is this exploitation? And I think it's particularly ironic that Louise and I watched the movie on Amazon Prime. You know, it opens with the giant Amazon penis, you know. It was, so your sense of it was that Amazon came out as kind of a hero in this?
No, I thought of it more as a reflection building on that theme of generosity, because we saw the generosity of the people living this type of life, that part where she really doesn't have anything, but she's willing to give up the lighter to that other person, and those of you who have seen the movie know that. And I took that. I was trying to figure out, where does Amazon come in outside of helping her out? But I then realized it's more of a generosity thing. Is this a another thing was that one of the characters in this movie is America. It was the scenery and the beauty of it and the vastness.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Help bring people to realize that loneliness, that uncomfortableness that the audience feels in the loneliness, and looking, you know, for anything that they can give. And here's a little bit here, here's a little bit here. And oh yeah, corporations will give you a little bit too, but we're not going to be there in the long run. We're just going to give you, a little generosity here.
Wayne, I gotta wrap it up, but thank you. Well said. We will continue that conversation. And what about taxes?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone.
Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history. And we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, this central plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log onto my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we came out of World War II with a debt that was about 127% of GDP, the highest it had been in a long, long time. And the top tax rate was 91%. And Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican governor, paid off a lot of that by borrowing even more money and engaging in massive infrastructure spending. The Eisenhower Interstate Highway System, building brand new schools, building hospitals, or helping communities build hospitals. There were two of them in Lansing where I was living, St. Lawrence and Ingham Medical, they built during that era. And that so built the economy with that top tax rate that we got our debt back down, we got our economy back. Joe Biden is proposing to do essentially the same thing under the the American Rescue Plan. Now, families making less than $75,000 a year this year will probably owe nothing in federal income taxes. And Biden wants to raise taxes on people making more than $400,000, and he wants to revisit Republican President Dwight Eisenhower's plan to rebuild America. There are some voices who are saying, no, wait a minute, you can't do that. Dan Mitchell, Dr. Dan Mitchell is on the line with us, the co-founder of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, and the Center and freedomandprosperity.org is the website. Daniel J. Mitchell is his Twitter handle, as well as CFANDP. Dan, welcome back. It's been a long time since we've talked. So what's your objection to what Joe Biden is doing?
My objection is I don't think the federal government should, I think it's too big already, and I don't want it to get even bigger. And we already had a $2 trillion supposed COVID relief package, not a lot to do with COVID, actually. Now he has a $2 trillion so-called infrastructure plan, although only $115 billion is for roads and bridges. And then he also has this additional $2 trillion plan for even more social spending, and all that's being accompanied by a lot of higher taxes. And the bottom line is I just don't think making our economy more like Greece or Italy is going to be a good recipe.
Or Denmark or Canada. Right now, our federal government is about 17-18% of GDP. And if you take out all of the privatization that is happening in the federal government, you know, a little more than a third of our total federal budget is privatized, and if you include, you know, acquisitions, it's more than 2/3. More than half of our intelligence budget has been privatized. If you take all that out, our federal government, the actual federal government part of our federal government, is about 10% of GDP. In Canada, I believe it's 37%. I'm running from memory off numbers that are probably a couple of years old. I think most of your European countries, you'll find the government spending because they're providing healthcare system. They're providing healthcare to everybody and free college to everybody, is typically around 35 to 40% of GDP. I don't understand why you're saying that a federal government that's 20% of GDP, more or less, is a bad thing when all these other countries have a better quality of life, more, a more predictable retirement for older people. Younger people can go to college without ending up in debt. We had 600,000 bankruptcies last year for medical debt. It's going to be far worse when we finally see the stats because of the COVID. And the total number of medical bankruptcies in Canada, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Greece combined was out for 30 seconds. So you probably missed the end of my rant, and I missed part of what you said. So go for it again.
Okay, well, I think I heard what you said, and I simply responded by noting that according to the OECD data, living standards in America are about 40% above European levels, and a person in the bottom quintile in the U.S. has a living standard roughly equal to a middle-class person in Europe. So there is a real consequence in terms of slower growth, lower wages, lower salaries to having a European-sized government, and I just don't think that Americans would want to pay that price.
Well, I lived in Europe for a year, and yeah, the standard of living is somewhat lower than it is here for the middle class. people are less likely to have more fancy furniture, or maybe they buy a car every third year or something like that, and homes are a little more modest, at least where I was living, out in rural Germany in Stuttgart. But everybody had health care. Everybody had free education. Nobody feared old age or retirement. I mean, it just seems to be that the terrors of living in America that are characterized, you know, and made visible by things like this movie, Nomadland, you know, are pretty much not the norm in countries that have bigger governments. You say America's government is too big. You know, I'm fine with cutting parts of the defense budget, but I'm not hearing an argument that says that there's here's the perfect size of government. What is it? You know, can you identify any country in the world that has gutted all of their social safety net systems, that has done away with Medicare, that has done away with Social Security, that has done away with all these so-called big government programs that you're talking about, where life is actually good and people have a high standard of living? Denmark supposedly has the happiest people in the world.
Well, speaking of Denmark, did you know that until the 1930s, there was virtually no welfare state in Denmark or any country in the world? The Western world became rich in the 1800s and early 1900s when there was no welfare state, no income tax. Now, once they got rich enough, these countries made choices. We all made choices to varying degrees to adopt big government sectors. But that comes at a cost. Instead of growing 3% a year, maybe you're growing 2% a year. But over time, that adds up to a lot. And like I said, I don't think if the average American saw a German family or a French family living in a tiny flat with a refrigerator the size of something you have in a dorm in the United States, they would not want to trade places. And that's the trade-off that we have to be honest about. Do you want
because the food is fresh
economy?
and it's right down the street. I mean, you know, it's.
Okay,
I think you know, for anybody who's lived in Europe, Dan, I think they're rolling their eyes right now. I mean, I lived in Europe for a year, and I've probably spent another year of my life in at least a half a dozen European countries, and people, you know, have you ever watched Michael Moore's movie Where to Invade Next, where he goes around Europe?
I have probably spent a year in Europe myself, extended speaking tours, visits, and stuff like that. And I know
life is not miserable there.
Far more expensive. Housing is low. I'm not saying it's miserable. I'm saying that they made a choice to have bigger welfare states and higher taxes. And by the way, their higher taxes are mostly on the middle class and low income people.
So you're saying
I just don't.
Right. You're saying America has. So you're saying America has, you know, has more money, basically. Well, in 1800, the wealth of the top 400 Americans was 2% of America's wealth. And that's when Reaganism kicked in. By 2000, it was up to 10% of America's wealth. By 2015, it was up to 15% of America's wealth. And on May 1st, 2021, it hit 19% of all of America's wealth. The top 400 families. Oh, Dan, I'm sorry. I wasn't watching my clock. I would like you to have the last word. I don't know if you got a quick rebuttal for that. You got about 10 seconds.
I would simply say that I'd rather have the opportunity that our more free market-oriented system in America gives us.
Okay, Dan Mitchell. Thank you very much, Dan. Good talking with you. Dan Mitchell is the co-founder of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The website is freedomandprosperity.org, and you can tweet him at Daniel J. Mitchell, M-I-T-C-H-E-L-L. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Lewis in Los Angeles. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, man. Well, I've been listening to you for a long time, and I totally agree with you on the idea that Reaganomics has screwed us royally. So I'm way in your camp on that. I live in Los Angeles. I live in a really good neighborhood in Los Angeles. You know where Beechwood Canyon is?
I don't. I'm sorry.
Well, it's the street you drive up if you want to look at the Hollywood sign. I mean, the Hollywood sign is right in the center of your vision.
Yeah, I know where you're talking about then. Yeah, it is a nice neighborhood.
Yeah, tourists come here, and the housing values up here are very high. Rent is very high. I have a good deal, but I pay a lot of rent too. And literally 3 blocks from here, there's huge homeless tent cities going on. Huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, hundreds of people. living in tents and garbage everywhere and everything. And I'm not mad at those people. I'm mad at the government for letting that happen. I'm not mad at those people. What are they supposed to do? You know, but I'm thinking, you know, and then you drive 2 more blocks and there's another one, and you drive a few more blocks and there's another one. I mean, they're all over the place. There's
they're all over Portland too.
Right in this neighborhood.
Any kind of public land here in Portland. I mean, like near all the on-ramps and off-ramps from the highway, that's, you know, city-owned land or state-owned land. And so they don't get evicted from there. You know, it's not private land, so they're setting up all over the city. And you know, it's like, this is not their fault. I mean, this is not, they are not to blame for this.
This is how you got the French Revolution, man. I mean, all you have to do is watch Les Miserables or whatever you want to watch, or read, you know, Tale of Two Cities or whatever. You know, when people have nothing to lose and when they're that down and out, eventually they just get mad, and it's like, I'm going to die anyway. What the hell? And you can seriously have a revolution. I think the politicians in Washington, you know, the Democrats are trying to do a decent job, but they're not perfect. The Republicans just don't care. And it's like, guys, it was the French government not caring about their poor people that eventually overturned them, because you can't have this many people with this little to lose. See what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean that was arguably brought on by a famine. There was a shortage of bread. The wheat crop, I think, had failed, but or in part. What's interesting to me, Louis, is that the people who are talking about revolution in the United States are not the people living in the homeless camps. And in fact, even the Nomadland thing is mostly a white phenomena. And they're not talking about revolution either. But it's these white guys with guns, and you know, who have enough money to buy, you know, a $2,000 or $3,000 gun, and fly around the country and you know, do their cosplay. And it's just like totally weird to me that the guys who are not.
I understand that point, because you know they seem to they kind of, these guys want to live in a movie. You know, they watch Marvel Comics movies and they want to be one of the superheroes and tote their gun and have a war. And they're, you know, that exists, and it's very negative in our society. But I'm saying, when these homeless people suddenly get a fire lit under them because they just literally, and if some firebrand comes along who knows how to make speeches to them and stand on a pedestal and say, you know, enough's enough, you know, that's where it starts.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
I'm getting played
off. We'll see, Louis. Yeah. Thanks a lot for the call.
I just wanted to...
Good talking to you. By you will see, I didn't mean to dismiss that. My point was that I think it's a lot harder to communicate en masse to homeless people than it is to middle-class people on Facebook who are hoarding guns. You know, that was my point. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you know, you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. With you. Some middle class, I think this is absolutely fascinating. Some middle class families will have a tax rate of 0 this year or less. A tax rate of 0. This is, because of the, if you make less than $75,000 a year. And keep in mind, of course, the Trump tax cuts set up a massive tax break. And, that 83, I think, percent of it, or 87% of it went to the top 1% and big corporations. But the rest of it was for average working Americans. Remember that? Average working Americans are getting billions in tax cuts. But the tax cuts for average working Americans in the Trump tax cuts phase out over 10 years. So that, by the end of this decade, they're going to be zero. So this year, from the Trump tax cuts, people's taxes should be going up. Biden blew that up with the American Rescue Plan and the Democrats. Not one Republican vote in the House or the Senate. Although Kevin McCarthy is now sending out tweets and emails and letters to all of his constituents saying, look at this, cool, we got some help for the restaurants. They got, and there's a whole bunch of Republicans who are like, oh, look at this, wonderful, we're there. The federal government is here for you. We're doing this. Right. And all Biden is suggesting on people making $400,000 a year or more is that their taxes go up to less than they were just a couple of years ago. I mean, he's not proposing to roll back all of the Trump tax cuts. He's not proposing to roll back any of the Bush tax cuts. He's not proposing to roll back any of the Reagan tax cuts. I think, frankly, they should all be rolled back if we want to have a decent America. But no, he's saying, no, we're not going to do that. So, this crazy alert, I've got to tell you about this. This is our crazy alert for the day. Melinda Gates and Bill Gates are breaking up. That's a whole other story that we'll get into in some detail tomorrow, what that means for America. But the conspiracy believers have a theory, and it is making its rounds on Facebook and other social media that Melinda Gates is actually a clone, and that, a male clone, in fact, to protect the money of Bill Gates from when he gets arrested, when Donald Trump, here it is, follow the money, they divorced to secure some of their money for when Bill Gates has his money seized by Trump for crimes against humanity. Right. Bill Gates is putting trackers in people's vaccines. He's going to get busted for the... By the way, if you're hysterical about being tracked, get rid of your phone. Bill Gates is putting... They're saying he's putting trackers in the vaccines. It's a crime against humanity. Donald Trump, who's the actual president of the United States, in fact, his letterhead down in Mar-a-Lago still says so. He is going to arrest Bill Gates and take all his money. So they're splitting up so Melinda can take half the money, and then after Bill gets out of jail, they can split up what's left over. That's one theory. The other theory is that she's leaving Bill Gates, Melinda's leaving Bill Gates for Dr. Anthony Fauci. Right. Amazing. Along those same kind of crazy lines, the top headlines from the far right, from the newsletter, The Writing, RIGHTING.com. The Daily Caller's top story. I think the Daily Caller is Tucker Carlson's media empire. Biden's plan for government to replace the family. Rather than help the family, the Biden administration has something more disturbing in mind, a big government takeover of your family. Right. It's incredible. Biden's racist presidency. This is from front page. Biden and members of his administration stereotype blacks according to racist paternalistic preconceptions. Right. Pat Buchanan. Biden versus Biden on Is America a Racist Country? Can you lead a country whose history you profess to shame? Yeah, I think we can acknowledge the bad parts of our history and move forward. The Germans have certainly done that very well. This is from the Washington Examiner. Tim Scott declaring America is not a racist country is the key to fighting real racism. I think the key to fighting real racism is to stop real racism, is to stop the policies. I think if you stop a lot of the structural stuff around real racism, a lot of the actual racist sentiments will wash out. This is from the another one from the Geller Report, Democratic School Abuse. The WorldNet Daily, Democrats are brazenly anti-God and anti-woman. Right. I'm telling you, they literally live in a different world, in a different country than the rest of us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
A lot to talk about. We'll pick it up on the other side of this. And then in the third hour of the program, we're going to get together with Lori Wallach and talk about vaccines. How do we vaccinate the world?
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, a liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries' PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity.
Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Our representative now, Charlie Crist, he's a congressman from Florida, used to be the Florida governor as a Republican. He's become a Democrat. He's a member of the House of Representatives. He's running. He just announced this morning he's going to run for governor again. He's going to. I think he has a chance of really giving Ron DeSantis a run for his money. But we'll see. You know, time will tell. And the White House has announced a plan to redistribute vaccine supplies, telling basically states use it or lose it. Which might change the attitude of some of the folks in the red states, or it might not. I don't know. And 11 Madison Park, one of the world's fanciest restaurants, is going mostly vegan. Not 100%, but they're close enough that they're calling it vegan. And I think this is just spectacular. It's good food. It's a great way to live. It's a great way to eat. I've been mostly vegan for years and years and years. I go for periods where I am entirely vegan, and then for a year or two where I'm eating fish once or twice a month, and but basically that's about it. So anyhow, I see that as a good sign. But we've got a lot to talk about here, and there's been just so much about Nomadland and all this stuff. Valerie in San Diego. Hey Valerie, you wanted to weigh in on it?
Yeah, I did. I called you quite a while ago when I was living in my RV. At the moment, I'm not. And I have a little bit of a different experience. And I know that they covered a certain segment of the homeless people. But you got to remember what I said, that my problem was that I was on disability. I'm still on disability. And essentially, there's no such thing as affordable homes or affordable places to live for people on disability if you're living on only $1,000 or less a month.
Right.
And so that didn't get covered. And I'm watching her loading those potatoes, and my back was hurting just watching that. I'm going, oh my God. we can't work. I mean, I saw her do all sorts of work. We can't do that. You know, if you're on disability, you don't have that choice, that opportunity.
Yeah, there's some mention of this in the movie, but it's a big piece of the book. You know, this movie is actually based on a nonfiction book, and in the book, there's talk about how one of the things that the communities were doing were helping people out with, you know, sharing painkillers and teaching techniques for you know, physical therapy and stuff, so that you could undo the damage done to you by working in that Amazon warehouse, all those repetitive strain injuries and things. But Valerie, excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you very much for the call. Kevin in Terre Haute, Indiana. Kevin, you wanted to respond to Dan Mitchell, our conservative about taxes.
Yeah, I listened to him, and you could tell that he was a 100% advocate for the status quo. And you know, Europe is worse off than we are. How lucky we are. You know, don't change nothing. But I would just wanted to ask you. You know, personally, I think that if a person that runs for office any place in America, if you can't show proven results in a 2-year time frame that you're helping reduce poverty, you're helping reduce the need for food stamps, you're helping with affordable or for housing, health care, you know, just the basic needs to make life a little better for the average person. You know, if you can't do that in 2 years, you shouldn't be even allowed to run for office, because Trump had in a couple of months had reduced over 100 regulations and gave the richest people like $1.5 trillion every 10-year tax break in almost the time that it takes lightning to flash, you know. And yet in 2 years time frame, every 2 years we have an election. None of these problems go away, and they don't have to be held accountable for them, and they get to allow them to be able to run for office again whenever they don't do nothing.
Yeah, I get your point, Kevin, and I completely agree with it. I think even beyond that, you know, we've given the Republicans 40 years now to prove that trickle-down economics, that supply-side economics is somehow magically going to build the middle class. And instead, what we've seen is this absolutely screaming explosion of the number of billionaires and the amount of wealth they have, and the middle class has been wiped out. So I'm with you. Bruce in Petaluma, California. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind this morning?
Hi, Tom. This is a great program, and the Nomadland kind of lifted a veil of what's really available to work for and how much you can work for in this country. I think it showed that the number of jobs that are available are very, very minimal, low-paying jobs. They don't even pay you enough to live in a place. I live in California, which is very expensive. And if it wasn't for a service that has developed here that helps people low income, I would be not living in this state anymore. I'd have to move on. I wouldn't know where right now. I've been here most of my life. And I worked in a factory when I was a kid. I was going to school, and I got a job in Evinrude Motors factory. And the people that I was working with, all these guys were complaining all the time about their job. They all had a summer home up at the lake, you know, whatever that was. They all were buying a new home. They were buying a car. I mean, they were living really well and beefing and whining about their job.
Yeah.
The whole time.
That was my dad's friends, you know, who worked at Fisher Body and General Motors, and, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in. It was, you know, lower middle class, white Lansing, and but I didn't hear so many complaints. But you know, several of the people on our block had a little cabin up on Houghton Lake, and you know, everybody bought a new car every year or two. So yeah, I'm with you, Bruce. It's that is no longer America.
No, and they were not happy about it. And I traveled in Europe and I saw how those people live. I thought, you know, they're living a reasonable life. And Americans that came there were expecting a lot. And they were embarrassing because of their brazenness and kind of unsympathetic behavior about reality. You know, they had a few bucks extra, and they spent it like, you know, look at me. And it didn't impress me at all. My friend and I that were traveling tried not to look like Americans because we were so embarrassed about the behavior of our
the ugly Americans, is a cliche because it's actually real. Bruce, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story with us. It's a good one. John in San Francisco. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Hey, before I get to the subject, I say happy May 4th because May 4th, 1945, my mother's turning 90 this year, and she still, to this day, on May 4th, puts a candle in the window for the victory in Denmark.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
Yeah. And they do that in Norway, too. And Evinrude just went out of bank, just closed 6 months ago, I heard. Wow. Anyway, I lived with my auntie and uncle in Denmark and studied preparatory university school there. And my uncle was the manufacturer of a large foundry in Denmark, France, and England. And when he would complain about his taxes, it was 74%. But the kicker that I couldn't help him with was he also got taxed 74% of his interest on his money in the bank, and that really ticked him off. So he would say, "I get taxed 150%." So anyway.
But he was one of the richest people in Denmark, right? I mean, if he owned all these factories.
He sold his company to his employees and left Denmark for a few years, and tried to retire to Florida, and then came back and came back to socialized medicine in Denmark. And passed away recently. That's how they lived, and everybody was so happy in that town. It was amazing, and that country is,
Well, I mean, if you know that if you get sick, you're going to be taken care of, no matter what, no matter how bad it is. If you know that if you get old, you're going to be taken care of. If you know that if you you lose your home, you're going to be taken care of. If you know that if you want to advance yourself by going to college or trade school, that's going to be taken care of. You're never going to have student debt. You can start a family. You can build a family. I mean, what's not to like? Yeah, your refrigerator might be a little smaller, but the store down right on the street in front of your house has fresh food every day.
Right. Yeah. They shopped every day, and they go to the cheese shop, the bread shop, the vegetable store.
Yeah.
They had.
Everything is fresh.
Yeah. If it's a day and a half old, it's over the counter. It's over the hill.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really is a different lifestyle, and yes, it's a little more modest in many parts of Europe, including where I was living in Germany, a little more modest than here in the United States. But I'd say a hell of a lot happier, and people weren't, working the insane hours, and they did have a union to represent them, and they took off weekends, and man. I don't want to, hyper-idealize Europe. Europe certainly has its troubles. But to say that, America with a Social Security system that's been underfunded since the 80s and, and no social safety net, really is crazy.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. John in Cumberland, Maryland. Hey, John, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, greetings, Tom. I'm a long-time listener and an occasional caller. And what I'm calling about is a comment about my experience in an early Nomadland lifestyle. We used to call it mobile homelessness. And how I got into it was 25 years ago when I lost my job at the age of 45. I really wasn't fit to do anything else, and so my life really kind of fell apart. I traveled out west, looked up a friend, through living out there, met a guy who was already in this mobile homeless lifestyle. And I traveled all around Indian country. I had a serious religious experience up there at the Four Corners region. Went down to Mexico, learned to be a silversmith in San Miguel de Allende. But I'll tell you, living that mobile homeless lifestyle is not easy. It's really taxing on your intellectual resources. It's really taxing on, having to figure out, your life basically every day you're on the road. It's really not for everybody. And back when I was doing it, there weren't, big communities to be part of. So I enjoyed doing it. I got a lot out of it, but it was not, as depicted in the film. I can tell you that.
Well, and if you're 45, it's a whole different thing than trying to do it if you're 65. And your body is just not working the way it used to, and he says as his arm is in a sling, I totally get your point. Have you kept in touch with the people that were living that lifestyle, or was there any community at all that you formed there, or was this mostly John goes on his version of Jack Kerouac's On the Road?
Yeah, that travels with Charlie, Steinbeck and some of those others, like that from that era. But I'm 70 now. A lot of these guys are dead. But one thing I wanted to leave you with, since we talk about what socialism in America is about, is a quote that I'm bringing to your show from Steinbeck. And Steinbeck said, "The reason socialism never took root in America was because the majority of the poor regarded themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires."
You're right. That's an old one, too.
And it's a goodie.
Yeah, and that's been applied to Republicans. Your average Republican thinks of himself as a temporarily embarrassed is kind of a phrase from the 40s or the 30s, but one lottery ticket away from, or one lucky break away from being a billionaire, and therefore we've got to look out for the billionaires because hey, one day you might be one too. And
I think that I thought that more possible 50 years ago, but I think more and more of the population is seeing that the game is just too rigged for that anymore.
Oh yeah. And we used to, during the Reagan era, there was that show, The Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And, very rarely did they talk about, this guy inherited all this money, or this guy, how very, very difficult it is to actually acquire the kind of money to have the kind of home that, I'm forgetting his name now, but, that guy, the Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous guy, he died a couple of years ago, that he would want to come visit your house. John, thanks. Thanks for sharing your story with us, and more food for thought as it goes. We'll be back with the rest of your comments in just a moment. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Back in 1 minute. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, interesting. John in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, John, you wanted to get back to Dan Mitchell and his thoughts on taxes and the size of government?
Oh, yeah. Well, I got the Bible of Europe. It's a book written by Jeremy Rifkin, and it's called The European Dream.
Oh,
and,
that was 15 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2004.
Yeah, I remember when it came out.
Well, that's when, yeah. But some of the chapters he has in here about Europe, one of them I like, creating the individual, inventing the ideological property. He was just talking about the mindset from like World War II. Everybody was kind of burned out on governments, I guess, or they had to reinvent themselves. But one of the things, I've been in Europe too. I was in Denmark, but that was way back in '72. So everything's invalid. What's coming today, but what's going on today. Sure. But one of the things that I think a lot of people have to understand that, okay, let's do a little bit of analogy. Oregon and Germany, I think since East Germany has reunited with West Germany, but they're about the same size in square miles. Oregon's around 97,000. I think Germany's about 110,000. But the only thing, Germany has like 90 million people. Oregon only has like 3.5 million. So there's not a lot of elbow room, to have a 3-car garage and a half acre of lawns and stuff. I mean, but that's always been the case is overpopulation. I mean, look at Great Britain. They have something like 75 million people, and it's smaller than Oregon and whatever. So
yeah, in other words, higher population density. Yeah,
higher population. I think that your guest didn't have all the true facts together. When you're squished together, you really can't, expand a lot. You can expand in your mind, but not
and you don't necessarily need to. When you can walk less than a block to the local store to pick up today's fresh bread or fresh vegetables rather than having to drive 2 miles to the supermarket, every weekend or something like that.
I thought it was really unique. They would have people living on top of their businesses, like the baker, or somebody selling tools. They're just upstairs, and that's where they live, and so they go back downstairs and do their thing, their business.
Yep.
So
I'm with you.
I'm just kind of commenting that guy really didn't have a lot of things together. But I know you have a short of time that you can interview people. But anyway, that's how. Yeah. In a nutshell.
John, thank you for your comments. It's very, very well said. But I want to get some more calls in here. Lauren in Seattle. Hey, Lauren, your thoughts?
Hi, Tom. About every 2 years, I spend 3 months in Europe. I live with a family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 teenage girls. My wife and I speak some Dutch, and that guy could not be more wrong.
About the European standard of living?
Yeah, we live in a nice middle-class neighborhood. They have a car, and we have dozens of friends in lots of different houses that we visit. 2 of them are doctors. We have friends and family in Sweden. And this guy talking about some lower European standard, he simply must not have ever visited anybody's home in Europe.
Yeah. It left me scratching my head. Lauren, thank you for adding your personal story. I mean, here we are hearing from actual people who've been to actual places. Larry in Bellevue, Iowa, you wanted to talk about Dan Mitchell?
Hi, thank you. Yes. Your last 2 callers were spot on. I applaud them. I have a friend in Germany right now, and I heard Dr. Mitchell's comments, and I sent her a quick text message and asked her thoughts. And basically, her response was bull excrement.
Right. I get it.
And she did admit that, they pay much higher gas and road taxes, which I agree with. Yes, we should be paying those also if we ever want to get off fossil fuels. And her comment was that the standard of living there is very, very good, and food is cheaper than the States.
Yeah, I think he's defining standard of living by money and size, and I think the Europeans would not refer to it as standard of living, but quality of living.
Absolutely, very spot on. The minimum wage there is she says around $11.23 an hour U.S. dollars, which comparatively, yes, absolutely, and we all have further to go.
Yeah, and although most folks are unionized and they make a much better income than that. Larry, thank you. I mean, this is, the European dream, to quote the title of the book, is really what I think a majority of Americans are starting to say, Joe Biden might get us there. He might get us there. He might get us to where, he said the other day, healthcare should be a right, not a privilege, right?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country. More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared, "The era of big government is over." The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So every day that goes by without the world being vaccinated, and yes, we have our own problems here in the United States. The Biden administration announced this morning, big deal, Arkansas used none of their allocation last month. Right? You've got so many people down there who are buying the Fox News pitch. You know, you've got Tucker Carlson now trying to claim that Joe Biden doesn't even believe in vaccines. The reason why they're doing this, of course, is if they can keep the virus making people sick, then that's going to keep the economy sluggish, and that's going to give the Republicans something to complain about in the 2002 and 2004 election. This is their clear election strategy, is to prevent us from hitting herd immunity in the United States. But that's here. All around the world, yeah, and for every person that Tucker convinces and Fox News convinces not to get vaccinated, when they get sick, they're a possible, laboratory, a petri dish for new genetic variants of this disease. But it's even more true of the other 6.5 billion people on the planet. And so what do we do about that? How do we vaccinate the world? Let's ask Lori Wallach, the executive director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, tradewatch.org or citizen.org/trade. Her Twitter handle is Wallach, WALLACH, Lori, LORI. And Lori, welcome back. It's been a while since we talked. Let's boil this down to plain English. People talk about tips and IPs, and I think it's just going right over the head of most Americans. Boil this down for us. What's going on?
There is not enough vaccine being produced to provide the 10 to 15 billion shots needed to get herd immunity for the world, which is the only way, Tom, to end the pandemic and avoid there being a place where there is an outbreak that brews the vaccine resistance, more lethal, more transmissible virus that will put us all back into global lockdown. And the reason there isn't is pharma greed. A handful of companies have originated these vaccines after getting billions in government funding from countries around the world. And they, under a variety of rules, including those of the World Trade Organization, have the power to have monopoly control over how much is produced. And they are unwilling to share the recipes to make enough get produced to get the vaccines we need. So maybe this year, 6 billion doses will be produced. We need 10 to 15 billion. And the reason there isn't more is these pharmaceutical companies have monopoly powers to control production. That's the whole story.
So I'm looking at today's Financial Times, and the top story, literally the top story at the very top of the page, Pfizer's COVID vaccine revenues hit $3.5 billion in the first quarter, raising full-year revenue projections from the jab, from the vaccine, from $15 to $26 billion after reporting a $3.5 billion contribution to profits in the first quarter. They're sharing this, of course, with the German company BioNTech that actually developed it. They're talking about $72 billion here. First quarter earnings were up $14.6 billion just for Pfizer. And then the story that's a little farther down the page is Fauci warns against discarding trade rules on COVID vaccines. He says forcing drug companies to abandon intellectual property rights to COVID-19 vaccines risks backfiring if it leads to long legal disputes. You know, I get the logic of that. But my understanding is that what we're talking about here is not just going to these vaccine companies and saying, gimme, but instead going to them and saying, we want to license your formula to other vaccine manufacturing facilities, and there's thousands of them around the world. Or hundreds of them anyway. We want to license these to these other vaccine facilities, and they will pay you a reasonable fee. You're going to get, at the very least, cost. We're not talking about stealing from Pfizer, or do I have something wrong here?
You are spot on. You're exactly right. And here's the thing. I would follow Dr. Fauci anywhere when it comes to medicine, epidemics, vaccines. But with respect to the trade law question about lawsuits, he's just wrong. There are 100 plus countries at the World Trade Organization who are sponsoring what is called a waiver. The waiver would allow countries around the world to be able to do what you just said without risk of the lawsuits, without risk of the legal fights. And since the Trump administration, the U.S. has blocked 100-plus countries from being able to negotiate even, to agree to language for this temporary emergency waiver of the WTO rules that otherwise allow the pharmaceutical companies to monopolize how much is produced and where. So if Dr. Fauci wants to make sure that there aren't a bunch of these legal suits, then he should be the number one promoter of what is technically called a waiver of the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property, or TRIPS. It's just a set of rules that pharma got injected into the WTO to protect their barriers. And if that is waived temporarily, it means the 160-plus countries in the WTO, they aren't going to get sued. That's the whole damn point. And the U.S. has been almost single-handedly blocking this. And you know that's what Trump would do. But what the heck was Biden?
Right, but and just to be very, very clear, Lori, and I want to make sure that my understanding of this is accurate, if we got this TRIPS waiver to the World Trade Organization rules around intellectual properties, around patents, that does not mean that a vaccine factory in Egypt can suddenly start making vaccines based on the formula that AstraZeneca or Pfizer has come up with and just say, screw you to Pfizer. It means that they can begin the process of independently negotiating with Pfizer. Okay, guys, we want to make the vaccine here. How much of a royalty do we have to pay you? Do I have that right?
Almost right. So the situation now is that companies have two choices. Because of these WTO rules, these monopolies, they can just say, we're not going to make any more. We're not going to allow any more to be made. We control it. Everyone go away. Or they can voluntarily choose to make an arrangement to have another company make it for them or to license the technology. With those two choices, since last year, the companies have said, go away. We're not making any more. What the TRIPS waiver would do is take away the go away option. The options would then be you can voluntarily make arrangements, charge your prices, negotiate your terms, or if you don't, you will be forced. And the statutory rate will be much lower. In the U.S., typically a 4% on its costs plus 4% for profits. In India, the last time this was done, it was 6%, and the court then added 7% profits plus costs. But if the companies volunteer versus being forced, it's much more in their interest. They can make more money. But what cannot continue, Tom, is the option the waiver would take away, which is simply for the companies to say, we don't care, we're not making any more.
So in no case do these companies get screwed. They either get a small profit or a slightly larger profit. Yeah, they just don't get obscene profits anymore, although they can still make obscene profits here in the United States, right?
Correct. So the difference is either they get a statutory rate because they forced themselves into the situation by refusing to volunteer of having a compulsory license, then they get the statutory reimbursement, which ain't nothing. 7% of profits on top of costs.
So, Lori, we just have 10 seconds. How do we advocate for this?
The most important thing to do right now is start calling the White House. It's a decision Biden himself can make, and he has to make it in the next 2 days. Call the White House switchboard.
Okay, and the White House comment line is 202-456-1111. Lori Wallach, Executive Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, tradewatch.org. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Always great talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We will be back. Stick around. And welcome back. And let's see, here's Cindy in Houston. Hey, Cindy, thanks for sitting on hold so long. I'm sorry to, it's worked out that way. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'm just going to go back in reference as far as to, it kind of like ties this will tie to me what you're speaking about kind of like all together. The problem in our country, of course, is the inequality. And the problem that I see is people will say that Bernie Sanders he's with Russia, he's a communist. And it's really sad. If you go back to FDR, when you go back and you look at, did a little bit of research, and FDR, you will see that when FDR became president, it was during a time that we needed help. It was during the Great Depression. When FDR became president, he was called a communist. The Republicans at that time, you know, it was more like FDR cannot become president, right? But what he did, he was such a great president that he lasted, 4 terms. And that's the reason now why today we have a 4-term president, was because of FDR. And
right.
So to me, the problem is...
Because of the Republican response to FDR.
Exactly. And if people... The problem is that they did not want Bernie Sanders to be president, not the Democratic Party, and of course not the Republican. In 2016, I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders, and I went to San Antonio, Texas, and I saw the Democratic Party take Bernie Sanders because they wanted Hillary Rodham Clinton, and they literally stepped on him. And I didn't realize I didn't realize that could even happen. I mean, I finally became awake at that time and realized that, oh my God, we're in a mess. 2020 comes around, and our advantage, of course, is that more and more people are beginning to understand who is Bernie Sanders, what is his message. And it's just scary at the same time, because the problem is awareness and education. If people can go back in time and look at, as an example, in our country today, it is hard for a young adult to go get an education. My daughter needed to get some medical care done yesterday. She could barely afford it. She has a loan on now she cannot go back to school now because they're holding her transcripts right now until she pays her $8,000 loan. So when you look at our country and we're going downhill. The middle class is shrinking. We're not going up. And so it's the education that we need. Socialism for the rich. That's what we have today.
Yeah, and hopefully that's ending. I mean, you now have Joe Biden actually using Bernie Sanders' language. You know, healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. He's not supporting all of Bernie's programs yet, but I think he's moving in that direction, and Bernie has had a huge influence on this. He deserves a huge thank you from all of us for everything he did, and Elizabeth Warren as well, although Bernie was there first. And for the longest time, 11 years every single Friday on this show, among other things, pitching the story. So I'm with you, Cindy, and I think that finally, the things that Bernie has been saying that have always been mainstream. They have always been supported by the majority of Americans. That's why Donald Trump stole a bunch of Bernie's rhetoric when he ran for president. It helped him win. He was going to bring jobs home from China. He was going to give everybody in the country free health care. Donald Trump campaigned on Bernie stuff. And now it's normal. It's such a great thing. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building, trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? The last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Uli in Teaneck, New Jersey. Hey, Uli, thoughts on Germany?
Hallo Tom, wie geht's?
Hey. Mir geht es ist gut.
Es geht dir gut, das freut mich. I have to laugh when I hear about quality of life, comparing it to Germany and the United States. I mean, you know, I'm retired now, and I still have dual citizenship, so my wife has a few more years to go, but we will be moving to Germany. Because our house here in Teaneck, even if we pay off our mortgage, our property taxes are so high that most of our retirement money goes to paying property taxes. A friend of mine in Germany who lives in a larger town in northern Germany, Bielefeld, about 500,000, I believe. He pays about $250 a year in property taxes. I mean, I can't even if I pay off here, I won't be able to afford to live here. I mean, even health insurance. I mean, I don't even know where to start. It's a joke. The older I get, the more I regret ever coming here.
Yeah,
that's how I feel about it.
I get it. Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking as somebody who has firsthand experience and actual examples to share with us. I appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, Uli, I'm sorry. Because of the delay there, I heard you after I had already pushed the button to disconnect you. Hopefully we'll connect again soon. Stephen in North Reading, Massachusetts. Hey, Stephen, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? In addition to being a adjunct economics professor, I also was a manufacturer's rep for many years for consumer electronics. And so I dealt with a lot of countries around the world, Singapore, England, Germany, but in particular with Denmark. I dealt with a number of companies I represented from Denmark. And one of those companies, I became very good friends with the owner, and he would constantly be starting new companies. He was a serial entrepreneur, starting new companies and closing down other companies, and constantly trying to invent new things and so forth. And one day I said to him, Peter, how can you do this? How can you constantly keep dumping money into all these companies that aren't making any money? And he said, I don't have to worry about where I'm going to sleep tonight. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to eat. I don't have to worry about my kids' health. I don't have to worry about them getting an education. Why wouldn't I put my savings into new companies? And after doing a little bit of research, I found out that Denmark has a higher entrepreneurial rate than we do, because we will lose our homes if we fail. They don't in Denmark. They keep their homes, so they can keep going at it. And it was just really eye-opening to me, and it just flies in the face of what these people say, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just the Medicare for All part. If you go back and you look at some of the I think the Congressional Research Bureau, Bernie had commissioned some studies on this, and John Lewis, or not John Lewis? Yeah, was it John Lewis? No, it wasn't John Lewis. There was the guy who kept introducing Bill 676.
Okay.
In any case, he would, they asked, what will the impact of Medicare for All be on small business? And the answer is clear and unambiguous. More people will be willing to start small businesses.
Yes.
John Conyers was his name. He was the congressman from Detroit.
Everybody I asked, how can you pay these high taxes? Doesn't that bother you? They would always say, yeah, we don't like paying taxes any more than you do, but look what we get for it. Look what we get for it.
Exactly. Exactly. You want the government, this idea that there's big government or small government or wrong side, you want the government to be exactly the right size to meet the needs of the people. And I mean, it's like in the Declaration of Independence, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, the reason why we have a government here is to do what we want them to do, not what, Charles Koch wants them to do, not what some cranky right-wing billionaire wants them to do, not what the Mercer family wants them to do, not what billionaire oligarch Donald Trump or billionaire oligarch Rupert Murdoch and his son want them to do, but what the people want them to do. And in other countries where the Supreme Court has not said that billionaires can own politicians, by and large, the government does what people want them to do. And here in the United States, you get literally the entire Republican Party. Mitch McConnell announced it yesterday. There won't be a single vote for the infrastructure bill. Not one Republican vote, which is kind of good news because it means that the Democrats can just go ahead and make it as big and as cool as they want, and they don't have to compromise with anybody except Joe Manchin. And, and that's a whole other conversation. But, I think it's just such an important thing to realize that, because money has so corrupted politics in America since the mid-'70s with those two Supreme Court decisions, and especially since 2010 with Citizens United, we have a twisted political system. It's been deformed by giant money. Stephen, thank you. Thank you for sharing your actual personal stories with us. We'll be back. Nomadland in America?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, I get people, living in a van as a wonderful lifestyle. My parents were looking forward to that. But as a desperation lifestyle, this shouldn't be happening.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history, with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to destroy the myth that America's government's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The fact is that it's been getting smaller since the founding of the country. We, among 34 OECD nations, have the highest population to representative ratio in the world. We have one voting member in the House for every 747,000 Americans. Now, if you compare that to Germany, They and our House, which has 435 members, the Bundestag has 709 members. That ratio is 458,000 per population, per voting member. And if we were to go back to the 1930s ratio in the United States, we would have to have 1,156 House members. And that's according to the Pew Research in 2018.
Right.
And so I'm really sick and tired of people coming on and saying our government is too big and our quality of life is great. If our quality of life is measured by anything, it should be measured by our representation. And clearly, we're at the bottom of the barrel. And the last thing I will say is that I've spent a lot of time in Scandinavia. I've lived there for 2 or 3 years, been all throughout. And, you know, the bottom line is that they don't lie to each other. If you want to have a successful nation, tell the truth. And if you want to be able to tell the truth, you have to be able to read, and you have to be able to think. Everyone there can read. It's a country filled with engineers and scientists. It's very hard to BS one another. And they've had many years living in poverty and destitution, and they decided that at one point they've had enough of it, and they were not going to lie to each other, and they were not going to have wars. Sweden didn't have a war, hasn't had a war for 400 years. 400 years, no war. That's why those countries are doing better. You look at countries like Taiwan that don't lie to each other, which is why they survive. We lie to each other, which is why we're dying. I mean, that's the bottom line. We don't have education in this country. We have advertising. That's what we've replaced it with. So that's my little rant, and I'll send it back to you and listen.
I think it's a brilliant rant, Jonathan. I'm with you. Back about 5-6 years ago, Louise and I spent either a week or 2 weeks in Copenhagen, Denmark, doing this show live from the studios of Danish radio. Danish radio is kind of their equivalent of PBS, you know, or BBC. And they were kind enough to loan us a radio studio to use for 3 hours a day. And they even had one of their regular staff producers for one of their shows they were willing to loan her to us as well. We compensated her for her efforts, but bottom line, you know, we were there and all that kind of stuff. And you know, it was completely independent of anything Danish radio was doing. We were basically just renting a studio from them. But because their producer was working with us, the word was kind of spreading around the studio about the kind of debates and discussions that I was having. You know, it was all in English, obviously. It was my American radio program. And so they had me on this Q&A show that they have on Danish radio. It's in English. They did it in English language. I mean, most people in Denmark speak English as well as Danish. And so they did it in English. And it was an hour show, and regular Danes called up and, you know, asked Thom Hartmann a question, right? Asked this American talk show host a question. And I remember this person calling and saying, so in the United States, are you trying to tell me that it is possible for a family to go broke, to lose their home because somebody in their family got sick? And I'm like, yeah, not only is it possible, but it happened 600,000 times last year. And the next call was like, no, you've got to be one of these crazy Americans who's just making this up. That's not possible. Why doesn't America revolt? And I'm like, I don't know why we don't revolt, but I'm telling you the truth. And then the third caller was like, you know, another person going, how is that even possible? I mean, 600,000 people, why aren't they burning down the cities? And I'm like, because they think that's how it's always supposed to be. And then another person calls up and goes, you know, yeah, I visited America. I was an exchange student back 15 years ago when I was, you know, a teenager in high school. And, you know, Hartmann's telling the truth. and it was like, these Danes, I mean, for a whole hour, this was the main topic. There's, you know, there were other things that we talked about, you know, including education. But their minds were blown. I mean, it was just their minds were blown by this, Jonathan. And, you know, and I think I probably could have done the same show in any country in Europe, and the same result would have happened.
Well, conversely, Americans can't believe that human beings actually can live in a decent and civilized and reasonable way. You see, Republicans attack education all the time. My mother was an educator, and she spent her life teaching me what education means, and it does not mean going to vocational school, which is what most universities amount to. what education means is learning how to be a human being.
That's why we used to call it a liberal education.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I heard all the time in Scandinavia and among Scandinavians, it was how bored they were living in Scandinavia because it was so safe. I mean, that was their complaint. How bored they were because it was so safe.
I'll take it. I'll take it. Jonathan, I got to move. I have to move along. We've got a board full of callers here, but thank you for sharing your story. Martin in Atlanta. Hey, Martin, your thoughts.
Hey, Tom, I just think that when Dan was comparing the size of refrigerators, I think that pretty much sums it up in a nutshell. Because, I lived in America 40 years, and then I went to Europe for 3 years to work, and I came back. And I grew up like my parents believing that we needed the biggest refrigerator filled with food till you couldn't put anything else in there, half of which would go bad and get thrown out before we could use it. And when I went to Europe, I had a small dorm-size refrigerator in my apartment, but I found quickly how nice it was to go to the corner market every day after work to pick up what I was going to have for dinner that night. So I'd go to the store 4 or 5 times a week and meet the neighbors and talk to people, and there was like no food waste. I ate healthier, fresh food. Mm-hmm. There was diversity from the foods. Mm-hmm. I mean, a supermarket in Europe would be something the size of what we have here called Aldi, which is like a large drugstore-sized building. It's not a super gigantic place where we throw away half of the food. And that, in a nutshell, kind of, gives you the comparison between the European lifestyle and ours. I mean, we store our hot water in these 100-gallon tanks that we keep hot all day, all night, whether we're using the water or not. Wasting electricity. The large refrigerator wastes electricity. We are driven to be massive consumers, and we end up buying more stuff than we ever need, and we're just trained to do it. And coming back...
Right, and somehow we think that... Go ahead.
Yeah, that's like, the sign of success that you can throw away $100 worth of food a week, or that you...
Right, exactly. That's the standard of living that Dan was talking about, the much vaulted American standard of living. Spot on, Martin. Martin, thank you very much for the call. Rob in Chico, California. Hey, Rob. Nomadland?
Yeah, I did not see the movie, so I say that as a disclaimer. It's more of a question about the general idea of progressivism, and in the movie, I suppose, how do you hold what choices you make in life? How does that fit into all the things, all the rights and services that you're entitled to in life? I mean,
well, the hero Fern in the movie lived in a town that was basically a one-company town, and that company, first of all, her husband had died, and then so she's a widow and she's working full-time and just getting by. And then the company closes, and the town, I mean, they literally took away the zip code, right? Again, this is a novel, but it's based on a real, on a nonfiction book. And so she can't have her house anymore. She can't afford her house anymore. And so she gets this little camper and goes on the road searching for work. In any other developed country in the world, she wouldn't have to worry about her health care. She wouldn't have to worry, she didn't have student loans, but some of the people she met along the way did. I'm missing what you're saying, Rob, and we only have 20 seconds. Let me give it to you to say.
I'm just curious. I've always been curious in a world, what does personal responsibility to a progressive, because I'm not a progressive, quote unquote progressive. How does personal responsibility for all the choices you make, the bad choices you make in many cases, do we just forget that?
Well, you suffer the consequences of your bad choices, Rob. There's, personal responsibility has become a phrase that Charles Koch and his friends, the billionaires on the right, have used to say, hey, you're on your own, Charlie. It's not my responsibility to help you out at all. Sadly, but that's what it is.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In other words, don't expect me to pay taxes so that you can have health care. And, these are choices that countries make. And welcome back. MJ in Seattle. Hey, MJ, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Oh, what a great conversation today. I haven't been able to listen to all of it today, but it's just kicked off a lot of stuff for me, and casino capitalism comes into my mind. What we have traded for the active rights that we should have is a chance on the midway. Gambling. That fellow Dan said at the end of his statement, whatever, it doesn't matter what it costs me. I want the possibility, the chance, the fantasy of becoming, this ultra rich person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we've been teased into. There's a mindset which is whatever it takes me to be one up on the next guy, even if it's my neighbor, even if it's the guy I work with, somebody I've grown up with, I will take that opportunity to have that one-upsmanship, because this means I can step onto that midway and I might get farther down than he will, and it's a zero-sum game, right? That the one where you see the world as not everybody doesn't have an opportunity to get along. The only way I'm going to make it is to take it from somebody else. And that's very former president-like, right?
The previous guy, yeah.
Yeah, and so a world that's ethical, moral, and where we look after each other. It's like the difference in the Bible. I'm just bringing it up as a side. There is this point where people are warring against each other, and then finally in the good news is supposed to be, now you become a member of the family. Now you are a child in this family. You are not a slave anymore. You are, you belong. And I think we have been spun out of that consciousness into competing and seeing everybody as somebody who might come along and take yours. It's horrible. It's just, I have this, now I've got this midway where some people understand that those games are rigged, and they're and other people don't know that. And
I think Americans intuit that, MJ. I think that's why when Donald Trump said the game is rigged, a lot of people said, yeah, I'll vote for you. And his promise was he was going to unrig the game. And of course, what he did was he brought in, literally for every cabinet position, he brought in, a con man or woman.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I'll step aside and let somebody else speak, but I'm so glad to be able to confirm this sense with you today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, MJ. It's great. Yeah, bye-bye. It's great hearing from you. We are going to hit a break in just a second. So, in fact, there it is. But MJ's right. And people, like the earlier quote, Republicans think that they're temporarily distressed billionaires or millionaires, I guess was the phrase from the 20s. And sure enough, yeah. We should have a lengthy conversation about personal responsibility per the last caller one of these days. We'll be back to that. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected,
the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It occurred to me that, you know what we have to start doing? The Democratic Party has to start buying Republican senators. And I mean, like, offering them like $10 million in campaign funds. They won't have to go out and beg for money. They can sit on their Democratic yacht and they'll just be bought off, and we'll be able to get...
If only the Democratic Party had that kind of money, Bill.
Right. Well,
I mean, that's the problem. You've got a billionaire network, the network that used to be called the Koch network, and now it's a little more diffuse than that. But you've got this network that Charles and David Koch have built over the last 40 years that now has more employees in the United States than does the Republican Party, has more offices than the Republican Party, has a larger budget than the Republican Party, operates year-round in all 50 states, and is almost completely invisible. There is no Democratic Party analog to that. There are no Democratic billionaires who have created anything like that. The closest to it is this thing called the Democracy Alliance. I'm on the board of Vocal. I used to be, a member of Democracy Alliance. I used to go to their meetings. And basically they'd sit around and say, okay, where are we going to give away a couple $1 million? Not tens of millions, not hundreds of millions, not billions. It's like, there is no Democratic analog to it, Bill. It just doesn't exist.
Right. Well, unless we have like an NFL draft or something, or they have like an auction block or something. But anyway, for senators. What I had called about, though, is we were talking about that movie, and I realized you lived sort of a similar unique lifestyle living on a boat for many years. And that sense of community, which is different than others, did that...
Yeah, but there's a difference.
Anyway?
There's a big difference. The boat that Louise and I lived on, we lived on a 46-foot, it was built in 1986. I mean, it was a $100,000 boat. But it was in a community of $500,000 boats, actually not. I'd say actually probably the average price of a place in the Capital Yacht Club of one of the yachts is probably $150,000 in that neighborhood, about what we paid. This was middle. These were all middle class folks. These are not people desperate. There are boat communities of people who are desperate. But they're, that's definitely not what I was experiencing, Bill.
Right, but Tom,
and I think they're few and far between, frankly.
Right, my girlfriend is a college professor, and 2 summers ago we went up to Maine to visit a friend of hers, who is also a college professor in the Bronx, and she had so little money to live on. She had this little cottage that was like a thing. So every week she would drive 6 hours down to Manhattan and live in her van on the street for 4 days, and then drive 6 hours back to Maine to live up there. And
just to have the Manhattan experience?
What's that?
Just to have the Manhattan experience? Like to go shopping and dinner?
Well, no. Well, so she could work. She had
she's working there. Okay. I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
To work at the college in the Bronx, she had to live in her van in the Bronx and put up with that, and then drive 6 hours back to stay her cottage for the other couple of days. And this is 2 years ago, and she was a college professor, who just couldn't afford to live in the New York area or anything. And,
yeah, this is not limited to people who've just been wiped out. I mean, especially adjunct professors. I mean, these are in some cases very, very low-paid jobs, which is just absurd because this is the future of America. Bill, thank you for that. Linda in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Linda, you have the last minute of the show. What's up?
Yes, you were talking about the allotment in Arkansas and how they hadn't been using that for the COVID virus.
For the vaccine?
And
yeah.
Yes, I was watching Christian TV. I was appalled. One of the largest Christian networks had a person on telling people about all the different vaccines and how they just don't know what it is and don't take it. And they were just perpetuating just false information. And, if they would only think about it, polio, they didn't know what polio was. They didn't know what mumps and measles were. But yet and still they took the vaccination and it wiped out the disease. So, I'm like, it's just really sad how they just perpetuate lies on Christian TV. And what it is, Tom, they have to cover up the fact that they were telling everybody that God told them Trump was going to win.
Yeah. No, it's all about Trump and it's all about the Republicans now for these fundamentalist Christians because the Republican strategy is keep the virus going so that the economy doesn't come back, so Joe Biden doesn't succeed, so the Republicans can win in 2022 and 2024, and so the Republicans can continue the tax advantages of these churches. I mean, that's what it boils down to, Linda. It's all about the money, and Jesus is puking. Anyhow, what a great point to leave on the show, but thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to somebody today, huh? We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!